For much of modern history, the Arctic sat at the edge of global attention, vast, frozen, and largely untouched. Today, that image no longer holds. As the region warms faster than anywhere else on Earth, it is rapidly moving from the margins of world politics to its center. The Arctic is heating up at nearly 4 times the global average. Ice that once acted as a natural barrier is thinning and retreating, opening areas that were previously inaccessible. What's emerging is not just open water, but opportunity, and with it, competition. This is why tensions are rising at the top of the world. At first glance, the Arctic might seem remote, but it sits at the intersection of geography, security, climate change, and economics. For the world's major powers, what happens there could reshape global trade routes, military strategy, and access to critical resources. 8 countries lie partly within the Arctic Circle: the United States, Canada, Russia, Norway, Denmark, through Greenland, Iceland, Sweden, and Finland. Together, they form the core Arctic states. But interest in the region now extends far beyond them. Russia controls nearly half of the Arctic coastline. For Moscow, the Arctic is not a future priority, it is a present one. Russia has reopened Cold War-era bases, expanded its icebreaker fleet, and increased military patrols across the region. These moves are often framed as defensive, but they signal long-term intent. NATO countries are responding. As relations between Russia and the West have deteriorated, particularly following the invasion of Ukraine, the Arctic has taken on new strategic importance. Finland and Sweden's move toward NATO membership has further shifted the region's security balance. But military positioning is only one part of the story. As sea ice retreats, new shipping routes are becoming viable. The Northern Sea route, running along Russia's Arctic coast, could significantly shorten travel time between Asia and Europe. That possibility has drawn global attention, especially from countries heavily dependent on trade. China, despite having no Arctic coastline, has declared itself a near-Arctic state. Beijing has invested in Arctic research, infrastructure projects, and partnerships, seeing the region as a long-term economic and strategic frontier. Its involvement adds another layer to an already complex landscape. Then there are resources. The Arctic is believed to hold vast reserves of oil, gas, and rare minerals, materials essential for modern economies and future technologies. Access to these resources could offer economic advantage, but extraction remains difficult, expensive, and controversial. Overlaying all of this is climate change. Environmental transformation is not just enabling competition, it is accelerating it. Decisions made now may lock in outcomes for decades. What makes the Arctic different from other contested regions is that much of what's unfolding is happening quietly. There are no dramatic flashpoints yet. Instead, there is steady movement. Infrastructure built, policies adjusted, alliances strengthened. The race for the Arctic isn't about who gets there first. It's about who is prepared for what comes next. And as the ice melts, the stakes continue to rise. As the Arctic opens up, the region is no longer defined only by climate change. It is now shaped by geopolitics and by how global tensions are spilling northward. Russia remains the dominant Arctic power. It has invested heavily in ports, military bases, radar systems, and the world's largest fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers. These assets give Moscow year-round access to Arctic waters and control over key shipping lanes. For Russia, the Arctic is both an economic lifeline and a strategic shield. The invasion of Ukraine has intensified this focus. As relations with the West deteriorated, cooperation in Arctic forums largely stalled. Joint military exercises were suspended and long-standing channels of dialogue weakened. The Arctic, once an area of limited cooperation, is now increasingly viewed through a security lens. NATO countries have responded by reassessing their own Arctic posture. The United States has expanded military exercises in the region, while Canada and Norway have increased surveillance and infrastructure spending. The decision by Finland and Sweden to align more closely with NATO has further reshaped Arctic security, extending the alliance's reach deeper into the high north. This changing balance has raised concerns about miscalculation. Harsh conditions, limited communication, and overlapping claims increase the risk that small incidents could escalate. Unlike other regions, rescue and de-escalation in the Arctic are slow and complex. China's role adds another dimension. Although it lacks Arctic territory, Beijing has steadily increased its presence through scientific research, investments, and partnerships, particularly with Russia. China sees the Arctic as part of a future polar Silk Road, linking Asia to Europe through shorter, northern shipping routes. This partnership is largely economic, but it carries strategic implications. Western countries are wary of Chinese investment in Arctic infrastructure, especially in areas linked to communications, energy, and transport. Beyond security, legal and political questions remain unresolved. Much of the Arctic is governed by international law, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Countries are submitting claims to extend their continental shelves, seeking rights over seabed resources. These claims overlap, and while they are currently handled through legal mechanisms, competition is intensifying. Despite rising tensions, there is still cooperation. Arctic search and rescue agreements remain in place, and scientific collaboration continues in limited form. But the atmosphere has changed. The Arctic is no longer treated as an exception to global politics. It is becoming another arena where power is tested, alliances matter, and influence is carefully measured. And as strategic interest grows, so do the risks. If this works, reply Part 3, and I'll complete the script with the final section on shipping routes, resources, climate impact, and global consequences. Beyond military strategy and political influence, the most powerful force reshaping the Arctic is climate change. Rising temperatures are transforming the region faster than scientists once expected, and the consequences are being felt far beyond the polar circle. As sea ice melts, Arctic shipping routes are becoming more accessible. The Northern Sea Route, which runs along Russia's northern coast, can cut weeks off traditional journeys between Europe and Asia. For global trade, this promises lower costs and faster delivery times. But it also raises concerns about safety, environmental damage, and control. These waters are unpredictable. Ice conditions change rapidly, infrastructure is limited, and accidents can have devastating effects in a fragile ecosystem. Increased traffic also brings geopolitical questions. Who regulates these routes, who provides security, and who benefits most? Beneath the Arctic ice lies another source of interest: natural resources. The region is believed to hold significant reserves of oil, natural gas, and minerals essential for modern technology, including rare earth elements. Access to these resources could play a role in future energy security and technological competition. However, extracting them is expensive and risky. Extreme weather, environmental sensitivity, and high costs mean that many projects remain speculative. At the same time, the global transition away from fossil fuels complicates long-term investment decisions. For Arctic communities, the changes are deeply personal. Indigenous populations are facing disruptions to traditional livelihoods, food systems, and ways of life. Melting permafrost damages infrastructure, while shifting wildlife patterns affect hunting and fishing. These voices are often missing from geopolitical discussions, yet they are on the front lines of change. The Arctic also acts as a global climate regulator. What happens there influences weather patterns across the world, from heat waves to sea level rise. Decisions made in the Arctic will not stay in the Arctic. What makes this moment critical is that the Arctic is still being shaped. Rules, norms, and expectations are not fully set. Cooperation remains possible, but competition is growing. The race unfolding in the Arctic is not a sprint. It is a long-term contest shaped by climate, technology, and power. And as the ice continues to retreat, the choices made now will determine whether the Arctic becomes a zone of cooperation or another line of global division.